Welcome to the Springs in the Desert podcast. We're those friends that you can take with you wherever you are on the path of infertility.
Hello and welcome back to the Springs in the Desert podcast. I'm Anne and always happy to be joined by my friend Cassandra. How you doing, Cassandra?
Good. How are you?
I am doing really well, and I'm very eager for today's conversation. We have been talking about hope and new beginnings, which has been our theme for the month of April. And we've had some really fruitful discussions. In our previous episodes, we did a little mini series on the virtues of faith, hope, and love. And so those have been really fun and fruitful. But today we wanted to get into a really important topic, and that is the experience of trauma and its impact, particularly in a season of infertility or loss. And we really wanted to address this for a long time. And kind of at first blush, it might seem, what does this have to do with the theme of hope and new beginnings? But we think that this is a really great time to round out that theme and bring this experience to light and talk about ways forward from an experience of trauma and to be able to find new life and new beginnings. And so we couldn't think of anybody better to bring on with us than our dear friend, Clare Kane, who is also a psychotherapist and a theologian and just an all-around caring and wonderful woman. So thank you for coming back, Clare.
Oh, it is my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me back, Anne and Cassandra. I'm delighted to talk with you both today.
We are really eager to get into this discussion, and I want to jump in. But first, just to issue a little disclaimer, just reminding all of our listeners that our discussion today is going to be very sensitive and it's for informational purposes. So even though Clare is a psychotherapist, this isn't a therapy session. We're not diagnosing anybody. This isn't treatment. We're hoping to maybe bring some things to light that might resonate with you. And then you might feel more comfortable, perhaps going to see a mental health professional if that's necessary. So this is a really important conversation that we're going to have today. And it's so interesting because I think especially these days, and I don't know exactly why it is, but this word trauma seems to be everywhere. And I think it can be one of two things. Either it's easily dismissed as kind of a buzzword, or it's like everything is trauma. And so it can get, I think, really confusing. So Clare, let's just start off with talking to us about what trauma is, maybe what it isn't, and maybe some of the things that we can look for to identify it.
Sure. So trauma is really defined as an emotionally distressing event, typically one that impacts or threatens, either actually harms someone physically, emotionally, sexually, or threatens that kind of harm, or someone is forced to witness that harm being perpetrated on another. Okay. So it's an event and the interior emotional response to it. So that is really the working definition of trauma. But everyone's experience of a traumatizing event, an event big enough to elicit that kind of response, is going to be totally different based on their background. So what one person might find traumatizing to the point of needing professional mental health care to manage symptoms, another person might not. They might be able to process that through thinking, journaling by themselves. Does that make sense? So it's really interior to the person.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe you can say a little bit more about, I don't know, some of those signs or ways that we might identify trauma, because like I said, sometimes we can think everything is trauma. We just throw that word around, but that could cause a person who really has had that kind of experience to maybe dismiss it or to say, I shouldn't take that so seriously, or I should be over that by now.
Yeah, I think the over that by now is a pretty common way that people try to repress. It's a coping mechanism. In a sense, it's understandable. People want to cognitively distance themselves often from something intense that has happened. So, and when I say intense, intensely distressing, right? So in the context of our conversation here, let's say someone, I can, in a sense, speak from my own experience. My reproductive condition manifested, it showed up in my blood work when I was 13. So I walked into a doctor's office. I sat down. Oh, we got your lab results. You have a condition called premature ovarian failure. You're going to have to take these medications for the rest of your life. You're not going to be able to have children. Bye now. And he walked out of the office. My mom was furious. She was sitting there with me, only 13, and like cold as ice. And that was intensely distressing. However, I will say that my 13-year-old brain wasn't ready to process how intensely distressing that was until much, much later. So the symptoms of anxiety and depression that manifested in me later were very much correlated to that intensely distressing, life-changing event. But often they manifest later, especially if it's something that happens in childhood. Sometimes kids process stuff right then, especially if they have access to play therapy. That can be really helpful. But most of the time, it just gets shoved down and simmers, like festers, and then will manifest later into adulthood. Yeah, I don't know if that's a helpful answer there.
Yeah, it is. And as you were speaking, I was thinking particularly about this experience of infertility. And let's maybe start there. It's, I think, a little bit more obvious when we talk about miscarriage, right? Because there is an incredibly traumatic loss of a child. But when we're talking about infertility, we don't necessarily make that connection. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about some of the aspects of infertility that can be for us, especially as we're going through it. And then if there are any particular ways which that kind of trauma can manifest itself.
Yes, absolutely. So in working with clients, I've really seen this a lot where the news of, first of all, sometimes it's the news of a diagnosis, right, coming down, right? Sometimes it's the repetition of every month, I haven't conceived. Basically, a sort of chronically accumulating loss. Does that make sense? Sometimes it's a hard stop, like happened to me, happened to some other people. Sometimes it's the chronic accumulation of that traumatizing grief, right? So that, shall we say, magnitude of loss, it's hard to compare griefs, right? It's not comparative. Everybody experiences it differently. But losing a faculty of your organic frame, like infertility, is intensely emotionally distressing because it is absolutely tied into your identity as a gendered person, right? As a woman, like your ability to conceive and bear children is tied into who you are. And so the loss of that, whether it's a hard stop loss, whether it's a realization over time, is life-shattering for people. It is huge. And so oftentimes people will manifest with symptoms of very high anxiety, right? All of a sudden they're worrying about everything. All of a sudden they're triggered by, and when I say triggered, again, that word is bandied about a lot. It's become kind of pop psych. They happen to be watching TV and a commercial comes on for Pampers and all of a sudden they're crying hysterically, right? Like that happens. Sometimes they'll have like memories pop in of like being in a doctor's office. And that's the other part of this. There's like a whole medical piece, like medical trauma is also a part of this, right? Because a lot of the way that medicine is handled is, especially women's reproductive medicine, is extremely mechanistic. You are broken down to your component parts, and something is wrong if you're experiencing infertility or pregnancy loss. So the mechanistic side, just some of the procedures that people experience in this process to consume, can be intensely depersonalizing and very painful, physically painful, super invasive. It's just, so I get very passionate when I'm working with my clients about this, is we need to start talking about, just even if we only just talking about the medical piece, about how dehumanizing this process can be for people, how deeply hurtful, physically painful, emotionally draining it can be. So that rising anxiety, lots of depression, feeling low. Depression is usually some of the biggest and most common symptoms are low energy, motivation, emotional numbness. No emotions really get through except sadness. It's only the sort of more darker, challenging emotions, loss of joy, loss of pleasure in normal activities. Those are really symptoms. And we're not, everybody has probably one or more of those on any given day. It doesn't matter whether you have infertility or not. We're talking about, 5 to 7 days out of a week, you feeling consistently like that, right? Super anxious, like your brain is on a high alert and you can't power down, or super low energy, or kind of roller coastering between the two. That's usually when we tell people, hey, if this is impairing your functioning, it's time to come in. If you're finding that your moods are unmanageable in the sense that it's impairing how you understand yourself, your relationships, your work sometimes, then it would be time to seek help from a mental health professional.
I'm so glad that you brought up this question of identity, because I feel like this is something that we talk about a lot in terms of identity, like our identities are rooted in Christ, to keep like a firm hold of him, because like infertility is not our identity, but it's so true that it's biological, right? Wired into who we are as people, as men and women, as husbands and wives. But yeah, just in the medical, because if you've heard my story before that I'm like a cancer survivor, if you've heard me talk about that on the pod, just for those of you who haven't, that's where I'm coming from, post-hysterectomy, cancer survivor. But I just remember looking at my appointment notes, like medical notes from a visit once, and it was, Cassie is a nice, white, 33-year-old woman, gravida 0. And I was just like, nice, white, 0. And it's so... Yeah, it's when you're in there and it's so sterile and you're all alone, and especially post-COVID, I feel like a lot of my pre-appointment anxiety has gotten tied to the COVID screenings too. It's, are they going to let me in? Are they not going to let me in? And so, but it's just, we're subjected to these things when you get into this, like the medical hamster wheel, and it can be really hard to rise above that.
It really can be. It really can. Yeah.
Yeah. And Claire, everything that you were saying, I think for me has been really validating. And I know that it's going to resonate so much with so many of our listeners. And I like the fact that when you mentioned grief, you talked about not being able to compare grief. We talk about a lot in this ministry, this idea that we can't really compare our crosses and that everyone carries our crosses differently. As you were describing some of those aspects of trauma, I was thinking back to some of my own experience and thinking of when Keith and I got married later in life. And then 2 years later, my mom passed away. And then in the next year or two, I entered into perimenopause. And then my hormones were just all over the map. And then I began to experience some really intense anxiety. I've just always had anxiety from when I was little, but recurrent panic attacks. I was waking up in the morning at a 6 or a 7 on the anxiety scale. And now, thank God, I found a wonderful therapist and was able to work through that. But now hearing you describe it all is making sense to me, that it wasn't my weakness, or I didn't have enough faith in God, or I wasn't invested enough in my marriage, or I didn't love my family. No, like there were a whole bunch of things converging in the space of a few years that really was traumatizing. And I'm not trying to be dramatic, but isn't that the case, Claire? See, we qualify, right? And we downplay.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, maybe you can talk a little bit about that too. So not this instinct to make everything a trauma and be melodramatic about it, but to really acknowledge when these kinds of things impact us deeply emotionally, not to mention physically and otherwise.
Yeah. I think that maybe one way to frame this, like this is something both clinically I find helpful as I'm working with clients, and also personally, I think often traumatizing events, like things that happen to us, have a before and after quality. Does that make sense? They have a distinct, life is different. My experience of myself, others is different before and after. And every one that comes down the pike, and this happens with grief especially, reawakens some of the old ones. Does that make sense? It's like a strawberry plant. If you want to say, I've dealt with those old grief process, like I have weed killered those, right? And then the new one pops up and oh my gosh, why do those all have leaves now? Everything is coming up. It's like a snow globe gets shaken up anytime one of these new griefs kind of come down the pike. And that is normal. That's normal because when we have had these life-changing losses, especially if you come to a diagnosis of infertility or you sadly lose a pregnancy, right? Everything in your history that you have experienced that had that traumatizing before and after quality, my life is different, will shape how you're going to handle this. And that's not some sort of demand like, you got to handle this. It's literally just how your brain has managed to make sense of the world after those things that went before are going to impact how it tries to make sense of what has happened right now, both for good and for bad, right? That happens to lots of people. You come out of childhood, big stuff may have gone down that was terrible, traumatizing, devastating for you. And you come out sometimes with good coping mechanisms, sometimes with a bag full of bad ones, right? And so some of those may creep in. I know for myself, I have post-traumatic stress disorder from some other childhood stuff. It absolutely had an impact on how I have handled the grief of infertility. Absolutely did. And there are things that kind of are my alarm bells, like old symptoms start ringing when new stuff happens. Does that make sense? Like I think about kettle whistling, like when I notice that's happening. And that can be a very empowering thing to turn on your noticing brain, not the judging, not the, oh, I'm just being dramatic. Why am I not over that yet? But just I'm noticing that I'm having a tendency to not want to eat even when I'm hungry. Okay. For me, that's a thing. Like, okay, that happened yesterday and it's happening again today. If it happens again tomorrow, I'm going to have to start to pay attention and to start really like figuring out what is rising up about something that's happening right now. My mom is ill right now, very seriously ill. So this is all like reawakening other stuff. And so being very gentle and compassionate with ourselves is so crucial. Our brain and our heart should just be able to like bootstrap up and march on. First of all, what we can reasonably demand of ourselves. And it's certainly not what the Lord demands of us.
Cassandra, did you want to jump in?
No, I'm just nodding along because it's so good and it's so important because, yeah, I feel like we have to develop that self-awareness. And like on the path of infertility, we're having to develop awareness about a lot of things. What's my body doing in this specific realm of my body, right? But our emotional life, our spiritual life, like these traumas that we're talking about can manifest in all of these areas, right? And we have symptoms. And maybe if you're a person who this would be helpful for, maybe even to write that stuff down. It's yes. My anxiety temperature was rising when this happened. Just like a little note. That's something I myself should really be doing because it's then the next time, instead of us being like subject to our emotions, and be like, oh, like, I noticed that this is happening. Like maybe I can make a decision now instead of just being reactive. And I'm totally like, this is something that I need to do. And now that I know I need to do it, I should probably start Season of New Beginnings, right? But yeah, so just thank you.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad. And I think it's that acceptance that it's okay to need help, right? And it's okay, not even necessarily professional help. It's okay to take this slow with ourselves, right? Like I can do that. I can just try to pay a little bit of attention. And I guess sometimes I know for myself, especially if you happen to be by temperament an overachiever, you can be like, okay, I'm going to get this down so I can get through it and get done with it. So that's not how healing from trauma works. It's a very slow process. It's moving through the emotion. You can't go around them. You have to move through them, but also being gentle with yourself. Okay, I'm feeling this now. What was the variable? I love what you said there, Cassandra. What was happening that I think might have been tied to that emotion? Okay, I'm going to pay attention. If that pattern shows up again, all right, now I'm prepared. Now a little bit forewarned, right? If something like that happens again, I'm going to try to be gentle with myself. The other thing I think is really important here is to talk about how our partners can really be part of this healing process. And I'll share a little personal story here, which was always so moving to me. So after I got married in 2011, and about 9 months later, just puttering through life. My husband's working. We'd gone back to school for something. I don't know. I'm always going back to school. And, chronic lifelong learner, right? And my husband came to me one morning. He's, hey, you doing okay? And I'm like, I think I'm fine. High pitched. I'm fine. He's, are you sure? Because I don't know if you know this, but you're sobbing in your sleep every night.
Oh, wow.
Like, what? He's like, you're sobbing in your sleep every night for the past week. And I'm like, oh, no. And then I looked at the calendar and I realized, oh, this is around my sister's anniversary of her passing. I had not been paying attention. She died very suddenly, very tragically. It had been almost 3 years to the day that she had passed away. My go-gettedness at that point was like, everything's fine. Just got married. Things are wonderful. But my unconscious was like, help. right?
Mm-hmm.
And the only space it had to do that was when I was sleeping. And if I hadn't had Wade with me, who knows how long it would have been before I like actually started like tapping into, there's still a big part of me that's grieving. And I haven't been ready or able yet to dig into that. It was such a help to have. And I think you need to go see someone. And he was absolutely right. On a wonderful counselor. And she was like hugely helpful for helping me process that big traumatic grief.
Wow. Praise God.
Listening to both of you talking about that sort of being aware, and Claire, what you just shared about your husband being aware of you, and also having the courage in a way to speak up and to mention that to you, I think that can give hope to our listeners who, whatever you're carrying, whatever sort of trauma or just really deep emotional or spiritual or physical burden that you're carrying, I think this helps to make it in a way a little bit less scary, right? Because we can think, oh my gosh, if I have this big burden, maybe I'm ashamed, right? Like I don't want to tell people about it, or I think I should just be over it, or I'm in denial that it's really a thing at all. I think the things that you both have been sharing help to break that down a little bit and say, okay, I don't have to see my whole entire history and all of the things right in front of me right now and get it figured out. No, okay, I can notice something today and I can tell myself, all right, if I notice this tomorrow, I need to pay attention. And if I notice it the third day, maybe that's the time that I need to act. And maybe I need to take care of this. To write things down, to write notes to ourselves, not to browbeat ourselves or to think of it as a weakness or like I'm writing down all the things that are wrong with me. No, I'm writing down things just like I would with a physical illness, right? I might write down these symptoms so that my doctor can treat me. And so it's the same thing with our emotional and our spiritual life as well. So I think that these are such important points. And gosh, I wish we had a whole other hour to talk more about it. But as we wrap up, Claire, I wonder, since our theme for this month has been hope and new beginnings, and when we're talking about something like trauma, it doesn't really feel like those things go together. So maybe what can you leave us with for our listeners out there who are experiencing trauma or who think they may have experienced some trauma in the past? What are some ways that they can work toward healing and really find hope and a new beginning for themselves?
That's an excellent question. And I think that in a weird but very definite and concrete way, trauma and hope are linked, right? Because the only way to heal from trauma is to have hope, to make an act of hope that things will get better. Not just the event will end, right? But that my heart can heal. The resilience of hearts is something that is just absolutely astonishing. I think sometimes we don't trust in the resilience of our own hearts enough and in the resilience and strength of the Lord's love for us, right? That like we have such an inexhaustible supply of strength to lean upon, right? And if you are in the midst of experiencing these symptoms like anxiety, depression, flashback memories, all of these things that can relate to trauma, manifestations of having experienced an intensely distressing event, definitely seek professional help for sure. It's always a good idea to kind of take your own temperature, right? In terms of like, what are the symptoms? What am I feeling? Am I seeing a pattern in those symptoms over time? Over 7 days, 14 days. And then to have someone else take your temperature, to have someone who does this kind of day in and a day out to sort of bounce ideas off of. Okay. And yeah, I think a lot of people come in thinking, oh no, I'm going to have to go to counseling and delve into every aspect of my life. It's like, no, not necessarily. Sometimes I have some clients, it's like 4 or 5 sessions and they're like, we're good. And then I have other clients who find it very helpful to sort of do the digging because they want to sort of get different things out of counseling, right? Yeah, I think that this link to hope is very, very real.
That's so great, Claire. And I think you have taken something that is really kind of scary and distressing, right? Like just that word trauma. And you've really been able to kind of break it down and to make it, I think, much less sort of scary and more manageable. And, you know, this idea that there really is hope, that there is the opportunity for a new beginning wherever we are on our path, whatever burdens we might be carrying. And so I thank you so much for being part of this ministry and for helping to process a little bit of this with our listeners today.
Oh, it is absolutely my pleasure. Always a joy to talk with you ladies.
Oh, thank you, Claire. Always great to be with you too, Cassandra.
Thanks so much, Anne.
And always wonderful to be with you, listeners. Please know that we are always here to walk with you, whatever you need. We love you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for joining us for this Springs in the Desert podcast episode. We would be so grateful if you took a minute to rate and review us so that we can reach more listeners. Don't forget to check out our social media pages on Facebook and Instagram, and go to our website, springsinthedesert.org, where you can sign up for our newsletter and community prayer list, read our blog, and register for virtual and in-person events. Most importantly, remember that God loves you so much, and so do we.